just a quick review of what we're doing. I should have thrown the slide in that had the differences between somebody who is a comparative psychologist and somebody who is a neurobiologist or a nephrologist. And I want you to realize again that I am not into behavior modification in dogs very much. I'm not very good at it. I haven't really read that literature. I am much more interested in the neurobiology of dogs. I'm much more interested in the evolution, and therefore I'm interested in the genetics of dog behavior. So that's what we have to do this morning. And so just to review a little bit, I took you through yesterday and I said that I was interested in the conformation of the dog only in the sense that I was interested in the behavioral conformation of the dog. There's a posture that the dog assumes in response to some environmental signal. In this case, it's the approach of a stranger, and the dog takes on a specific kind of conformation. Now, maybe you haven't ever used conformation in that sense before, but you realize if I change the shape of the dog dramatically, the dog can assume this conformation. And if this conformation is a signal to other individuals about the intention of the animal, if I change the conformation of the dog radically, then as a matter of fact, it cannot signal properly, right? If it is a signal. So anyway, if you assume that this shape of the dog is adaptive to the dog's well-being, if you will, to its survival, is by assuming this shape, the dog has a better chance of surviving than if it can assume this shape, then just realize that what you do when you go out there and you change the dog's shape radically, that you may be changing its adaptability rapidly. All right, so then the next slide, please. So we looked at another conformation here. This is what we call predatory conformation. This is an eye stalk behavior on a border collie. And we saw that chart, and we'll see it again just in a second, that particular behavior in the dogs has been exaggerated. You never see wolves do this exactly like this, or as prolonged at as high a frequency. I mean, this animal, just at any drop of the hat, will go into that particular shape. And so that in some ways we've taken the ancestral form of the behavior, and we've just intensified it and intensified it. We've intensified it in two ways, that the animal goes into an exaggerated posture. And it will stay in that posture beyond what its wild counterpart ever would. I mean, you never see wolves or coyotes or something like that hold that position for long. I mean, it's just a transition between a set of behaviors. And so, working on this kind of predatory behavior, ancestral predatory behavior that this animal has inherited, we go to the next slide, where we looked at what we've done to the various breeds of dogs in changing the profile of that sequence. So really what we were looking at when we look at all the breeds of dogs is we're looking at profiles for each one. We're looking at, in this particular chart, which is out of focus, we see that that here in the wild type, I have, isn't there a little button on the?
You have to do it with the little knob on top of the machine.
Actually, that middle button does work, but the screen is warped, so if you focus one part, the other part, it doesn't come in.
That works.
That's good.
All right, you fiddle with that, but it's gonna be, we're gonna need it better than that later on. Look at, in this particular chart, I tried to illustrate what the profile of the different breeds were by illustrating as to how intense each of those motor patterns was. Oh, they're much better. Oh, God, thank you. How intense that motor pattern is by how bold it is. So in the wild type, what happened to it? In the wild type, you got the eye stalk behavior, and it's just part of the sequence. There's nothing in there that's exaggerated, where when you get down here and look at the border collie, the eye stalk behavior is intensified. All right. In the livestock guarding dogs, I put it in parentheses because in a really good livestock guarding dog, you shouldn't see any of those predatory behaviors. Now, if I was smart enough, which I'm not, I could do the same thing with, let's say, reproductive behaviors. Remember, there's three major behaviors that we looked at when we look at the dogs. We looked at foraging behavior, and these are the foraging behaviors of a canid, right? This is how they go out and collect their food. So this is the foraging behavior. So I'm looking at the motor patterns and foraging behaviors. If I was smart enough, I could go through the dogs and I could look at differences in their reproductive behavior. All right, because reproductive motor patterns would be similar to this. Now, I haven't done it yet. I started on hazard avoidance behavior, which is the third category you'd look at, you know, fight or flight, escape behaviors, and so forth. And I don't have much experience with those right now. I like to work on them. But I think that animals like some of the terriers, I was doing an ethogram on some Irish Wheaten Terriers. And I find, for example, when I set this up, that in Irish Wheaten Terriers, I would find a very, very low frequency of them expressing submissive behaviors. And so, so when they would get into a dogfight, they just never give up. I mean, God, I had some terrible scenes with them, you know, where I thought I was going to lose them, and they would get in a fight with my Chesapeakes or something like that, and they'd never go into this submissive posture. They would never display the motor patterns that said, okay, I had enough, I'm losing. And they would keep going. And I kind of wonder, I've never been to a pit bull fight, and probably I never will go to one, but I often wondered what if the selective forces have been there is to get dogs to fight to the death, is if indeed you just delete somewhere along the line some of the critical submissive behaviors so that they can't ever say, okay, I've had enough. And that's just hypothesis, speculation. Don't go out and say, Coppinger says, you know, pit bulls don't have submissive behavior. But that's the kind of way that we want to start to do the behavioral profiles. And so I've only given you a third of it here in a few breeds of dogs. Okay. Are we all? We're all pretty good up to that point.
There is one behavior of the bite and shake.
Yeah, the head
Where
shake.
does that fit? Does that fit in there, or?
I don't, each one of these things I could probably break down into a whole other set of series of motor patterns. And so remember I added the cry, the mark in here. Now, for example, on some of the herding dogs, I don't know if any headers, but a lot of the healers will vocalize in here while they're doing it. While they're involved in the chase, they'll vocalize. Here, all of a sudden, you got two separate sets of vocalizations. You've got a mark, all right, where all of a sudden the dog comes out with a particular vocalization and says, I'm on the trail. And it's a rally call. And what it does is it rallies the other dogs to come in on it. And then they will go off on the chase, they will vocalize, and they'll have a series of it. And I just don't have, my wife hates this chart because she says it's just too, I mean, the people just turn off when they look at it. It's too complicated as it is. But realize that each one of those, I can vary those between breeds. Okay, so now the question is, how do we get it? You know, how all of a sudden, through selective breeding programs or whatever, can I change these things from one to another? Golly, I gotta emphasize though,